Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my channel, Marriage, Politics, and Sports. Today, we're going to react to Stephen Miller. This was from a few days ago. Usually, I'm reacting to Caroline Levitt. I don't know how much I'm going to say behind this guy. I think back in the day, I wasn't a big fan. I didn't really listen to Stephen Miller until this particular term. And this guy is really, really on point with a lot of stuff. I mean, if you want to call it his rhetoric, I think he could follow it up, especially when he talks about the law and how the law is supposed to work. I mean, he's excitable, harsh and all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly what the country needs anyway. So, without further ado, this is like a 24-minute uh, uh, press conference. Primarily just answering questions. And so we're going to let him do it. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel here. And we'll see what he has to say. I don't know how many times I'm going to interrupt it, but he might spark some stuff. He might have something to say about Brandon Johnson, who I believe is one of the worst men who took office in the United States. I believe that he should be locked up. Anyway, so like I said, without further ado, let's get started.
Hey, Stephen. Hey. Mr. Miller, you just said on CNN that you're abiding by the judge's ruling, but there's a number of federal options. What options are you considering for deploying federal resources?
Well, if I told you right now, they would just start pre-drafting their next motion for a TRO. So I would just say that the president has a very broad range and set of authorities when it comes to deploying federal assets. And again, as you know, we went through this in California with Newsom. He made a total fool of himself, pretending he had authority to defy lawful presidential command of the National Guard. We won in the very liberal Ninth Circuit, and a portion of the California National Guard has remained federalized to this day.
Should James Comey be perp walked? Should James Comey be perp walked?
What other cities is the administration considering sending National Guard troops?
Right. So, no, but there's different events happening in different cities. So here in Washington D.C., right, working collaboratively and cooperatively with the mayor, we have a large-scale public safety surge. And as part of that public safety surge, we have obviously all your federal components. I think it's 22 agencies in all, and you have your your city resources. Then, of course, the National Guard. In Memphis, very much been modeled off of D.C., where we have, or is being modeled off of D.C. We have the full interagency, IRS, ATF, DEA, FBI, and HSI. Then you have in that case, you also have the state resources too, the state troopers, state investigatory agencies, then the National Guard. So that's one model. Then in the case of Portland, you have an acute crisis with threats to life and property at the Portland ICE facility.
Yeah, but before you go over there, just one of the things they have to emphasize is that in Memphis, he has the governor, who's, I believe, a Republican governor, and he has access, because of the governor, to the blue state. And the blue state, the mayor is smart enough to not, fight the machine, because he actually understands that crime is rampant in Memphis, and that's on him, right? So even if the blackity blacks, Umgawa Black Power people, who are calling him all kinds of names for not trying to fight back, I think he's doing a smart thing. He's on the right side of history. Now, he might have to equivocate every so often when he gets in front of a black crowd. But the truth of the matter is, it should be about your constituents and their safety, not whether you hate Trump. You know what I'm saying? But in Portland, as in Chicago, you have the states in open rebellion against the federal government, which is sedition. And I'm not so sure why the governors and the mayors who are perpetrating this, I call alleged crime, allegedly perpetrating a crime, shouldn't be put in jail. So that's the way I see it.
And so that is a reactive deployment. There is a acute ongoing threat to lives and property, and so National Guard was dispatched to protect ICE officers and their property in the conduct of their duties at a federal building. The president has also said that in the immediate future, in Chicago, there's a need for the same. Obviously, you saw, for example, there was 2 vehicle ramming attacks against ICE officers in Chicago. The president has indicated in the future there might be additional resources brought to Chicago. But the most recent order that he signed relates to the ICE mission. I hope that answers your question.
What about
Will the White House abide by the
the
ruling?
reason I asked that, Mr. Miller, is the president has floated other cities, perhaps New Orleans. Is that still consideration? And the administration
Governor-
actively
yeah.
considering other
Yeah, Governor Landry sent a request, as you know, and so we're working with Governor Landry as we speak to figure out an appropriate next step. I'm not going to sit here and say advance what is next. Obviously, in the case, Memphis is a good example, a good model where the governor reached out to us. He said we've had, in fact, I think Memphis for many years had the highest per capita murder rate in the country. He said that Memphis has been suffering from unimaginable levels of crime for years. We want your help. We want the full Washington, D.C. package. As a side note, we meet every week with city leaders here in Washington, D.C., and this has proven to be, in their own mind, in their own words, one of the most extraordinary things that anybody has ever seen.
The Washington, D.C. package, law and order package. I tell you what, from a person who lived in Harlem back in the days when there was crime all over the place, I think all the people on the outside don't understand what it means to not live life of quiet desperation. That's why it's so easy for those protesters who absolutely don't live in those areas to have their ideological bullshit that they're playing. But if you got to have bullets whizzing by your head and, and squalor and drugs and drug lords in your neighborhood in known drug locations and drug houses and see the cops just passing by every day, this is where he's coming from.
Stephen, you said the other day that you want to use legitimate state power to dismantle left-wing terror networks. Which organizations were you talking about, and what kind of state power are you envisioning using?
That's a great question. Thank you. And I'm glad for the opportunity to add a couple more details to that. So the struggle that's taking place right now is between the lawful exercise of power by the American people through a duly elected government versus the unlawful exercise of street violence in the form of domestic terrorism. So, again, the clearest example of this is when you have ICE officers who are carrying out the statutes and laws of the United States to arrest and remove illegal aliens, who are being subjected to violent attacks in the conduct of their duties. That's an example of illegitimate violence, illegitimate power in the form of domestic terrorism being used to impede the conduct of their official duties. The answer to that, in a civilized, modern, civilized society, is to use legitimate state power, grand juries, subpoenas, arrest warrants, search warrants, and every other federal power at the disposal of the commander-in-chief to identify and find everybody who is trying to use the real and actual threat of violence to impede the conduct of these federal responsibilities and ensure that they're placed behind bars. I'm not going to give you any advanced information about what these investigations have yielded so far. The Joint Terrorism Task Force has the lead, but they have found that these campaigns, that's not, of course, only against ICE officers. There's also a conversation we're having about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the two attempted assassinations against President Trump, the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO, the attempted assassination of Justice Kavanaugh, which, of course, an insane sentence of 8 years. So it's the broader spectrum of political violence. But obviously, ICE as an agency has been subjected to a 9-month effort to substitute left-wing violence for the votes of the American people. No federal officer in the conduct of their duties should have to worry about being physically attacked, being physically obstructed, being physically impeded, being doxxed, having a bounty put on them. And the fact that Democrat politicians are trying to normalize this really indicates how far we've gone as a society, that there is not...
Listen, I think what's not, and this is really true, there's nothing that ICE is doing that's illegal. I mean, the legislative branch of the government gave them the powers to remove people out of this country who are here and out of compliance with legal status. It doesn't really matter whether they're a hardened criminal or not. If you're in this country and you're not in compliance, it's illegal to be here. So the only reason why we have so much consternation is that people are impeding what ICE has been charged to do. It's kind of like, having the community come out and protect drug dealers or people who are, let's just say that we had, no, forget drug dealers. If you ever had a license that was expired and you got stopped on the side of the road, your tags were out, your license was out, there's certain discretions that the cop doesn't have anymore because you're out of compliance. Even if you were a great driver, even if you had 10 kids, even if you own a home and all that kind of stuff and you're a nice guy, you're out of compliance. So you're subject to the laws of that particular jurisdiction that you are in. So in our country, if your visa runs out or if you come in violation of, Statute 8, 1325 or 1326, you are breaking the law. As simple as that. One's a misdemeanor, the other one is a felony.
Universal condemnation of this organized campaign of violence against ICE officers.
Wait,
Yes.
no, but just to
Right.
follow up. I don't know of many Democratic politicians who have endorsed these terrible incidences that you just referred to. And I also don't know of any evidence that there's some kind of vast
She's being disingenuous as hell. I mean, the Democrat politicians have endorsed all these things that's been going on all over CNN and MSNBC, everywhere that they speak. They give tacit approval to what's going on.
underlying organization funding them. Is that what you're indicating is happening here?
Yes, in fact, we know that it's true. But obviously,
You think Tyler Robinson was being funded by some terrorist organization?
no, what I said was that you asked whether there was some larger criminal conspiracy relating to domestic terrorism in this country. And I said, yes, there absolutely is. Now, of course, Antifa has been designated as a domestic terrorist organization. This is only one example of many in which we have, it's typically a continuum of violence. It involves both organized doxing, it involves violent threats and intimidation, it involves explicit calls to commit violence against a targeted person, and then that tends to escalate into physically violent and obstructive acts. And so it's this continuum that we see over and over again, where they're trying to use illegal violence and intimidation to disturb the operations of the federal government and federal personnel. And we see this playing out over and over and over again.
They.
Stephen,
Antifa isn't actually an organization.
Sir,
right?
we've
Yes.
spoken several times about how sanctuary city leaders and state leaders, they might face charges for human smuggling and harboring illegal aliens. Also spoken about 8 USC 1324. And, it's since gotten worse. And today, Brandon Johnson signed an executive order prohibiting use of city property for federal immigration operations.
By the way, that's a great example. On the Brandon Johnson, it's an example of how I was asked the question of, well, do you have any example that this behavior hasn't been condemned by Democrat officials? Well, I can go one better. The mayor of Chicago not only has failed to condemn the violent obstructive acts against ICE and law enforcement, but in the aftermath of 2 coordinated attempted murders of ICE officers through vehicle ramming attacks, he issued a no-go zone for ICE officers. What do we think would happen if, say, under a Democrat administration, Republican officials declared no-go zones for the FBI? What do you think the reaction to that would be? How many people do you think would be arrested and placed into jail over that? It's just important to understand these are not isolated incidents. If you can't see, then you don't want to see. In other words, if you can't see that since we've taken office, there has been a organized, systematized campaign to delegitimize, dehumanize, threaten, impede, obstruct, and physically assault ICE officers in the conduct of their duties, then I can't persuade you of it because you're choosing not to see what's right in front of your face.
Yeah, that's right. They're being willfully obtuse. Otherwise, intelligent people don't have to go any further than what they see every day, right? So right now in Portland, they had a sea of naked people trying to obstruct the road where the police are openly rebelling against the federal government, and rogue judges are saying you can't protect your own property. Now, Trump, in the credit I give to him, because I would have lost my patience a long time ago when I would have just told those little local judges to kiss my ass. But he always knows that when a judge says that he can't use the National Guard to protect federal assets, that's against that those judges are overstepping their bounds. And he damn sure can use the National Guard to protect federal assets, especially when the mayor of those cities are in open rebellion and have lawful orders telling their police officers to let ICE agents die in the street. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially they're saying to stand down. So stand down means that ICE agents could be in jeopardy, they could be killed, they could be assaulted, and the police will stand by and just twiddle their thumbs. This is Democrat shit, I tell you what, these people can never get office again. We have to make sure that they never get back in office again. Anybody who will do that against law enforcement, like that message in Chicago saying, stand down, let those officers under attack. If they die, they die. That wasn't in the message, but it might as well have been.
Do you believe that James Comey should be perp?
Yes, back there, sorry.
Jay Jones has not dropped out of the race for Attorney General in Virginia. He's under immense pressure to do so.
Yes.
He hasn't. Does that surprise you?
Sadly, it doesn't surprise me. Look, what you saw with the Jay Jones comments, and it's a piece of this whole conversation, was the deeply held inner monologue of a high-ranking Democrat. They're someone who rose to the top of the ranks of the Democrat Party. So if you read the text message exchange, it's clear that he talks this way often and frequently. That is his homicidal ideation and his fantasies about elaborate murder and torture is something that clearly he is comfortable with and is doing frequently. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of system is someone operating in where they speak so freely and commonly about, again, elaborate murder plots against people they work with? What kind of system brings somebody up like that and elevates them to the point of nearly being the Attorney General? That's a system that has absorbed this narrative that we see so often, which is that the Republican Party, and in particular that the Trump movement, again from the Democrat narrative, is basically, this is a term I've seen, is unpersoned, right? That they dehumanize you to the point of not having a right to live. And so we saw this, of course, with the 4 years of lawfare against President Trump and the desire to incarcerate him for life. Then, of course, that kind of eliminationist conduct and rhetoric then leads and gives rise to more violent behavior like attempted assassinations. And now, of course, because so much of this conduct was never punished over time, now we see so many Americans, not all Americans, of course, many foreigners too, who feel very comfortable engaging in direct day-to-day violence against ICE officers. It's a common experience for ICE officers when they're conducting an arrest to be physically assaulted by others while they are carrying out an arrest. So you might be arresting, say, a child pornography illegal alien, and you will get physically assaulted while you're doing it. Now ICE have to worry about getting sniped from rooftops when they're coming and going from their facilities. And we've normalized the idea, not I haven't, of course, and you haven't, but others have, that ICE officers should have to work in a federal building every single day where they're attacked going in, they're attacked going out, where every night there has to be street battle against armed insurrectionists every single night, night after night after night. That's normal. You ask why we need the National Guard, why we need troops? Because it takes hundreds of additional personnel, far beyond the resources of the federal officials working in Portland, to hold a secure a perimeter, to provide freedom of movement. And it's not enough, by the way, if you're an ICE officer, just to stand here and put the line back here, right? They're under sniping attack. They're going to get rocks hurled at them, right? They're in physical danger. So you have to clear a safe perimeter so that ICE officers can carry out their duties without being an imminent threat of physical harm. And the fact that we've normalized these attacks on ICE officers, that is how you end up in a society in which terrorism becomes the norm, and eventually elections don't carry the day because violence beats votes. And that's what we're seeing attempted. And so when we see a muscular response from the federal government, it's because we're not going to let violence beat votes. Next question.
Stephen, 3 months from now,
Yes.
when we're having this conversation in December, what do you see the end game being? Because you clearly don't have trust in some certain local and state law enforcement entities. And so where do you see the National Guard, where do you see the military going? You suggested that if the courts rule against you, you will find other ways to use the military. That would lead me to believe that there's a conversation about the Insurrection Act that is taking place. What should Americans expect over the next 3.5 years, understanding that there is a real likelihood that those same local law enforcement and state officials will never ever cooperate with your efforts? Should people expect the National Guard and the military in their streets over the next 3.5 years?
Well, I think so to be clear, you talk about the National Guard in the streets. So right now in Portland, they're talking about having National Guard deployed to secure a federal building in Portland. And so there's a lot of elements to your question, and I'll try to get to all of them. But, when I hear comments from Democrat officials saying that this violence from the left is being provoked, their word, by the presence of federal officials, think about how broken of a sentence that is, right? In other words, if tomorrow we went to, say, Dothan, Alabama, and there was a federal building there, and we put 100 police officers in front of it, they wouldn't be attacked. Nobody would throw rocks at them. Nobody would try to shoot them. Nobody would do anything. They would say, hello, good morning. Maybe they'd get them a cup of coffee before they go out for their shift for the day. They'd ask, how are your kids doing? How are your kids doing? The fact that Democrats think that their own base cannot contain their desire to inflict violence upon the mere sight. In other words, National Guard's not being sent there proactively. They're being sent there reactively to defend ICE officers under siege. So in theory, if ICE officers were in the building and the National Guard was in the building and nobody was violently attacking them, the only thing that you would see is there's a building, there's ICE officers, there's guardsmen. The violence is entirely rioters choosing to show up and wage violence at a specific federal building. They've handed out flyers. I saw one at Antifa flyer recently, and it said, we need to mobilize around the Broadview facilities, this is in Chicago, to shut down ICE. So what does that mean? When they say we're going to mobilize to shut down ICE, what are they saying? They're saying they're going to carry out insurrection against the federal government by using force, obstructive force, to keep ICE officers from going out and conducting arrests. Would we ever tolerate this with any other law enforcement agency? If we said shut down the FBI and say, let's pick one of the organizations that the media might understand better. So let's say the Proud Boys said we're going to shut down the FBI, and they went and they formed a human obstructive wall in front of the entry and exit to the Washington field office of the FBI, and they attacked anybody coming and going. How many nights do you think that situation would persist for? Not even one, let alone over 100.
So, this is the thing why Stephen Miller is the man, right? Whether you like this guy or not, you have to be either idiot or willfully obtuse or willfully ignorant not to understand that he's absolutely on point. None of this shit would be going down if people just follow the law. The law says that ICE has the legal authority to operate in every state of the union to remove illegal aliens. And if your state cooperates, they can go into the jails with a retainer or into a courtroom, and they can get the people they want without having to bring it to the streets. The fact that you make them have to go into the streets means they have to have more men, more women, more cars, more disruption to get the people they want. Everybody knows that. The Democrats know it. Everybody knows it. And they're trying to play willful ignorance. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that if the Democrats are just, I never really knew, as a black person, right? We were raised to vote Democrat, right? I mean, just blindly, just put a check in the mark. If you got a D on it, we would vote for it. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I can't believe I did. I hated the bitch. But, it was her or I didn't hate her. I don't hate anybody. I didn't like her policies. But it was either her or Trump. And back then, I said, well, how can I vote for Trump? He's everything the media said he is, which was crazy because he came off the run of one of the most popular shows on TV and nobody ever called him a racist. Or, Oprah, Big fat Al Sharpton, bobblehead Al Sharpton didn't see that much with him, but fat Al Sharpton, he was hanging out with Trump all the time. Jesse Jackson, all the black people was with Trump. All of a sudden, when he ran, all of a sudden he was this big monster, and I missed it, and I just said, well, wait a minute. Then I started looking into Biden, and let me tell you, Joe Biden was more racist than Trump ever was. And so, I just said, well, we got to get off this plantation. And so when I'm starting to hear these conservatives speak with the cloud from over my eyes and my head, they make a lot of sense because the black community has been in shit and turmoil for forever in the inner cities, right? Nobody wants to live there. Black people don't even want to live there. So this guy, he's just speaking the truth. And if your head is not clouded with Trump deranged syndrome, you can hear what he has to say.
We all understand this to be true. So to your other question, yes, the president has multiple statutory authorities under federal law to secure a federal building. And so when a court issues an injunction, the only activity that's enjoined is what's specifically enjoined in that order, not activity that isn't addressed or spoken to. Or there was another part, in 3 or 4 months. So this is the most important point I can make. This is the behavior of the anti-ICE rioters, violent tax doxers, is motivated by a desire to achieve a concrete outcome. In other words, their objective is fewer ICE arrests in Chicago, fewer ICE arrests in Portland. So very straightforwardly, the way to end this ongoing assault is to demonstrate that they will fail completely and totally. In other words, if you were able to secure these buildings using additional resources, you're not having your entire federal law enforcement apparatus doing nothing but physical building security. If you're able to use the National Guard to secure these buildings and free up your ICE officers and your FBI agents and everyone else to go out and do enforcement in the community, to go out and find dangerous predators and remove them, you will demonstrate very conclusively, as we did in Los Angeles, by the way, that all your riots and violence will get you is more deportations.
That has happened in Washington, D.C. That has happened in Washington, D.C. Has it not? And yet the men and women of the National Guard remain here in the streets instead of being at home.
Well, it's a great example, but not in the way that you phrased it.
Steve,
So, I know you all have questions, but it's a
But why?
it's a
But I
great-
think that's where,
You know,
if you're a
you're
democratic
like-
city,
right,
you're
like-
looking at Washington, D.C.
you're
and
like-
saying,
yeah, you're-
right, they complied, there is no mass
You're-
protest,
yes,
and the crime, President Trump said
yes,
it's a crime-free city now, so why are the National Guard remaining? And that is why there is such an affront.
You're adjacent to a great point. But
Venezuela.
the reason why there's peace and calm in the city is because the criminal element is understood that their criminal activity will not achieve their desired outcome. That's the most important point.
So you,
and the
so you
second
support
thing
them
is,
remaining in the streets
and the second
of
thing
these
is,
American cities? Long term?
here in Washington, D.C., the National Guard, as John Fetterman has said, is one of the most wonderful things that ever happened to the city. It means you can go out to the National Mall and not have to worry about being attacked. But the other thing is
But you
that
support them in American cities long term?
the National Guard deployment is part of a cohesive public safety operation, like in D.C. and like in Memphis, is an extraordinary blessing. The tragedy that I see is
So you support them in American cities long term?
I answered the question the way that I did. The tragedy that I see is when you have a 6-year-old boy, as happened recently, whose killer, who stabbed him in the head till the knife was blunt, got released from jail on good behavior. The tragedy is when you try to murder a Supreme Court justice and you're out of jail in 8 years. Right? The tragedy is when you have somebody who's been in and out of the criminal justice system for well over a decade with 39 arrests, like in North Carolina, and can just walk up to an innocent Ukrainian refugee and knife her to death in the throat. That's the thing that gets me upset, and that's the thing that gets the American people upset. And the second thing to your question is, putting people in jail who are committing this terrorist activity is the number one most important deterrent.
But you long term believe that over the next 3.5 years, the military
I think everyone wants me to move on to the next question.
Sure, but
Thank you.
I am understanding
I've been
that
very
to be
patient.
accurate.
Thank you.
Last week, Director Vogt paused infrastructure funding in New York City, the subway, the Hudson River Tunnel, and then he also paused funds in Chicago. They were connected LXXI, but I mean, can we expect, for one, is the administration going after infrastructure projects in Democratic-led cities, and are there other cities that the administration
It's a great question for Russ to vote. I'll do two more.
Yeah, you know what? I did it again, man. Stupid delete button. So forgive me for that one anyway. I was just talking about the dumb reporter who wouldn't get off of this thing about the National Guard. The National Guard, what do they do in general when they're not doing what we see them do? They're like invisible to most people unless they're deployed. So if they're not deployed, they're still getting paid. They're doing whatever manual duties they have to do just to stay in shape or be in formation or whatever for every 2 weeks. But the truth of the matter is, Trump is actually utilizing these guys and making the best bang for the buck. We're paying them regardless. And I just said if Nancy Pelosi would have invoked the National Guard on January 5th, so they would have been there, the 6th would have never happened. Everybody knows it. Anyway, and she wouldn't do it because she was afraid that Trump would somehow nationalize him to take over the country. Some stupid Trump deranged bullshit that she had running around in her head.
With CNN. So just to be clear here, will the administration abide by the judge's ruling? And then also, could you just clarify, is the administration actively looking into other legal avenues to deploy the National Guard in Oregon? Okay. I know you don't want to get into specifics.
So yes, the administration is going through the appellate process to obtain relief from the ruling, just as we did in the Ninth Circuit in California. And at the same time, we're availing ourselves of all available options, and we'll examine them. All right, I get you two more questions.
Venezuela, do you want to see Maduro out of Venezuela? What's next there?
I've nothing to add to that other than what the Attorney General and the Secretary of State has said, which is that there's a $50 million bounty that has been placed on Maduro in connection to his indictment as a narco-terrorist drug trafficker, and he needs to be brought to justice for the crimes for which he was convicted in an American court. Venezuela is run by a drug cartel that is guilty of not only flooding our nation with TDA and other foreign terrorists, but of course helping to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans through deadly drugs.
So we've heard that the president is considering cutting off funding, certain aid to Portland. What is the timeline on that? And what is he considering?
I'll get an update from Russ. Yes, sorry.
So regarding the shutdown, both the president and the House Speaker sort of alluded to being open to reforms to Obamacare. What reforms to the ACA would the White House actually support?
My only comment on the shutdown right now is that Democrats should support a clean funding bill to reopen the government, and that it's outrageous to shut the government down in an attempt to get free health care for legal aliens. Time for one more question. Yeah, back there, Brian.
You called a legal ruling legal insurrection. Are you recommending the president take action against judges whose rulings he disagrees with?
No, it's simply a factually accurate statement that when a judge assumes for him or herself the powers that have been relegated or delegated by the Constitution to the president, that is a form of a legal insurrection, and we have seen.
Insurrection carries a legal weight. So, are you recommending?
We have seen over the last 9 months a ongoing legal insurrection, in which district court judges, as a class, in many cases, have issued, which is why they've been overturned so much, have issued rulings that are flagrantly unlawful and unconstitutional. And it is an insurrection against the laws and Constitution of the United States. And we need to have district courts in this country that see themselves as being under the laws and Constitution and not being able to take for themselves powers that are reserved solely for the president. One more question.
You know what? That's one of the things I think a lot of people miss is that, like, first of all, Trump has energized the whole world, right? Whether you love him or hate him, there's something in it for everybody to either criticize or applaud or, be, deranged about or, just to be elated about. He has. And one of the things he's done for every single American is that he is on purpose, exercising and testing the boundaries of the executive power, in which in turn is making judges test the boundaries of their judicial power, right? The only guys who are really lacking and shit and falling behind is both the House and the Senate. Do you know what I'm saying? They should be doing things more than what they are doing. It just, these guys, that's the biggest grift in the United States, the House and the Senate. The House and the Senate, the House especially, can rein in all of these district judges because they control through vote, right, what these guys can and can do. So now all these cases got to go to the Supreme Court. Of course, a local judge cannot tell the president of the United States, you can't use the National Guard to guard federal facilities, especially in light of declared insurrection by the mayors and the governors of blue states who say, I will not let my police protect you. So these federal agencies are butt naked to the world with no protection because some asshole judge said so. Now, Trump, this is why everybody who says Trump is just unhinged is a lie. Because he could just say, you know what, we'll fight this out later, but I'm going to protect my people above your objection, judge, because I'm not scared of you. You can't touch me. And he could probably do that. But instead, he takes 2, 3, 4 weeks to get this thing up to the Supreme Court, to the right level, for the justices to say to these districts, guys, you're assholes. You don't have the authority to tell the president that he can't protect his assets. And he's winning so many of these cases because these cases should have never been brought. And the only other thing is that the Republicans, when the Democrats were in charge, the Republicans should have did that shit when Joe Biden was flying millions of illegal aliens into the country without any due process. And above all the laws and all that stuff, they should have had some Republican judge saying, hey, yo, you can't do that. But they didn't. They sat back and put us in the quandary that we're in now. So they're not blameless in all of this stuff.
Is Pharma Relief going to be announced this week?
Sorry, back there.
Why are White House staffers being let go?
Don't have no information on that.
Stephen, on James Comey, this week James Comey is being arraigned. Do you believe that he should be perp walked? Is he above the law? Is Christopher Wray next? And
I sure hope. I don't think it's safe. I sure hope that James Comey's not above the law, and I think the American people want to make sure that James Comey is held to the full legal standard to which any American who committed similar crimes to be subjected. Next to you, one last question.
Thank you. As we're seeing a surge of attacks on ICE agents, including, for example, the shooting in Dallas, and this weekend in Chicago, 10 cars, surrounding ICE agents, another one ramming into an ICE vehicle. To what extent does the administration believe that such attacks are organized? And based on that possibility, or we're alluding to Antifa, how does that change your calculation and how the administration is going to respond to these attacks?
Look, as I've said repeatedly, this is organized domestic terrorism. The purpose of domestic terrorism is to obtain, through violence and intimidation and the threat of violence, a change in politics or policy that cannot be obtained through lawful democratic means. So when you have a 10-car ramming attack with armed attackers clearly intending to murder ICE officers in the conduct of their duties, what else can you call that? Right? Remember, the central issue that was litigated in 2024 was whether or not to turn back the border invasion. Americans voted to send the illegals home. The invasion that took place was one of the greatest crimes that has ever happened in the history of this country. And now that ICE officers are simply trying to execute on the mandate.
See, he said it. I agree with him. Picture day after day of all of these people coming into this country, just destroying whatever boundaries we have. I gotta say, where were the Republicans? I didn't think they never had to act like assholes like the liberal Democrats are now, But where were they when this shit was going on? For 4 years, we had a weekend at Bernie's president. What did they do? Nothing. I mean, they just watched this shit happen. I don't know if it was a great plan for them to say, oh, this is going to get us elected in 2024. But hey, man, if you were able to stop it when this shit was happening, you should have fought back. Use your powers to delay and, disrupt, just like the damn Democrats are doing now. Just like the shutdown is a 100% Democrat. And we could just look at the numbers because all the Republicans are voting to keep this open. While the Democrats are saying, well, you know what? You just passed a big, beautiful bill. We want you to change it. So we're going to close down the government until you take out what the bill passed on. It went through the House, it went through the Senate, went to the president to get signed. And now the Democrats are saying, unless you change what was approved in the big, stupid bill, or whatever the hell bill it was, we're going to keep the government shut down. You know why? Because the Democrats are like, here's my analogy. The Democrats right now, as horrible as they are, as much as people really hate them in general in terms of winning elections, they are like men on death row. Men and women, not men, because a lot of Democrat liberal men are not really, whatever. They're like on death row. Okay, if you're on death row and you're in general population, or if you're a convicted murderer and you're in the gen pop, you have nothing to lose. There's no law. There's nothing that can scare you from committing another violent act against anybody. So that's where the Democrats are right now. They have no power. So they're saying, who gives a shit? We could keep the government down by just not cooperating. We have nothing to lose. People hate us anyway. So we're going to make the American people burn. We're going to make all the federal people burn in hell, because unless the Republicans acquiesce what they got approved and what they got voted on and voted in on, we're not going to open the government. And that's what Chuck Schumer is saying. And Timo Obama, Jeffries is saying, and all of those kind of guys. Man, I don't see how anybody could ever vote for any of these guys ever again. And I really can't. But we know that half the country thinks this is okay. Just like half the country believes that the Republicans are okay. So we're in a pickle, man. We are in a pickle. And if I was a government employee, which I was, I survived through the 30-something day shutdown because I was fully employed back then, missed checks and everything. And so I know what some people are going to. So I'm not just an outsider looking in. I had a 38-year government job, 38 years retired, but I was an engineer. So we had a little bit more protection than a file clerk in some bureau somewhere.
Of the last election and the laws that were passed by Congress, they have been the victims of an unceasing campaign of violence and intimidation and terrorism. As Secretary Noem said, there are now bounties on the heads of ICE officers. They have to shield their families' identities at school and in public. They're being constantly doxxed and threatened with assassination. Again, we're just days from an attempted mass assassination of ICE officers at an ICE facility. And the response to that has been to try to, for example, in Chicago, to try to prevent ICE officers from being able to enter key parts of the city to conduct their responsibilities. This is an all-out campaign of insurrection against the sovereignty of the United States, because the Democrat Party and those who are committing violence in this country do not believe in the legitimacy of the sovereign territory of the United States, and they don't want any of these illegal aliens to go home. So they want to cement by force, by violent force, the invasion that took place between 2021 and 2024. Thank you.
So listen, everybody who might be listening to this is the end. This guy is great, but look up the crime of sedition. Sedition is exactly what these states are doing, the blue states and blue cities. And, look at the definition of sedition and ask yourself, does Pritzker and Brandon Johnson fall under these definitions? Where the hell is Pam Bondi? Because I think it would be clear that I would bring this evidence, especially with these stupid orders saying, hey, well, we're not going to, with the order that came down from the police second in command who says, you know what, if the ICE officers need help, just, let them stick it up their ass because we're not going to help them. Stand down. Every single police agency around the country condemned that message. It was a lawful message from a police officer saying the ICE officers, if you need our help, they were calling in for help. And he said, eat shit and die, you pricks. He didn't say that, but that's what he might as well have said. Anyway, so listen, I hope if Pam Bondi is worth her salt, that she has a grand jury of people with the evidence against Pritzker and Brandon Johnson and indict both of them for alleged crimes against the country in open rebellion against the federal government for the crime of sedition. I think you can get an indictment. Whether you get a conviction or not, well, we can handle that. But I think they can get an indictment. Hey, anybody, just look up the definition. Just look it up and see if it doesn't fit those two guys. Anyway, and probably could do the same thing with the people in Portland. But just those two guys, because it's Chicago, third biggest city in I believe, major city in the country, I believe. Anyway, enough. Anyway, this is my first one. I don't think my first one with Stephen Miller. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. This guy is the dude that you want to have in a foxhole with you, especially if you're talking to law, especially if you want to talk, this guy is just good, man. You want him on your side. Oh, man. Yeah. Well, you know what? Man, you should have came earlier, but I gotta get out of here. But I thought this was a good Stephen Miller's the man. So I can see what you're writing. You're on the liberal side, probably. I think you're gonna lose this one. Sometimes you just gotta be on the right side of history. You know what I'm saying? We need to clear the country out. We need to keep our borders safe. Is Trump the perfect guy? No, absolutely not. But I would have voted for a ham sandwich before I put Kamala Harris in office. I can tell you that. And it just so happens Democrats were so bad, they gave rise to a man like Trump. Anyway, for the second time. With that, I'll see you in the next live. These impromptu reactions, I love these political ones. So, Art Payne, marriage, politics, and sports. Over and out. You need to come earlier. Next time, maybe we'll have a better conversation.